Hello, and thank you for joining me. This will be part 2 of occupation obfuscation. Last time I left you, I was talking about World War I, but I left out someone very important, and I'll tell you why he's very important. There he is. His name is Mark Twain, and Mark Twain was even foretold of by Moses in Deuteronomy 29. Mark Twain would come into the land, a foreigner who comes from a distant land will see the plagues of the land and the sicknesses the Lord has inflicted upon it. All its soil will be a burning waste, sulfur and salt, unsown and unproductive, with no plant growing on it, just like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in his fierce anger. So Mark Twain had a pretty cushy life once a few of his books sold. He was offered a trip around the world into every country known to man, if he would just write about it for maybe the people at home that couldn't um, afford to travel on a trip around the world, or maybe people who were just curious as to what life was really like on other parts of the world. So this he did. He titled the book Innocents Abroad, and he told some high tales in that book. It's an awesome book if you get the chance to read it. But here is what he said when he got to Israel, or Palestine, as it was called at the time. First published in 1869. So that gives you an idea, especially for the later census of people that is claimed. The waste of limitless desolation. Palestine sits in sackcloth and ashes. Over it broods the spell of a curse that has withered its fields and fettered its energies. He goes on to describe various cities using adjectives like forlorn, moldering, squalid, accursed, poverty and humiliation, untenanted by any living creature. Palestine is desolate and unlovely. And why should it be otherwise, he writes. Can the curse of the deity beautify a land? Palestine is no more of this workday world. It is sacred to poetry and tradition. It is a dreamland. I address this because I have even heard very big leaders in Christian TV and everything telling others how we need to be so sympathetic or empathetic toward all of the millions and millions of misplaced Muslims or Arabs from this area. But this begins to open the picture of obfuscation that we've been told. We've been had it slipped in under the door. The first few early 1900 censuses show around 300,000 Muslims, around 100,000 Jews, and 70,000 Christians living in the land. So this was not any huge civilization. No. 1914 brought the First World War, where Germany joined with the Ottomans against much of Europe, and eventually the U.S. got involved. And as you know, if you keep up with wars, to the victor goes the spoils. France and Britain, being among the victorious, gained control of the Ottoman lands to do with as they would. This is General Edmund Allenby. He fought for Britain to help run the Ottomans out of Palestine. Lord Balfour, a leader of the House of Commons, had wrote a declaration stating that Israel was to be allowed their historical land in which to rebuild a national homeland. The San Remo Conference reiterated that. San Remo Conference is where everybody got together and sat down and tried to divvy out all this new land they had taken from the Ottomans, or they had beat the Ottomans, and therefore someone had to figure out where all this land that they had gained was going to go. Mostly Britain and France fought over it, but it was a lot of land. So Lord Balfour calls for a portion, the portion or a portion of the national homeland for the Jews to be reestablished in Palestine. All of the Arabs that had been picked on by the Ottomans out of Turkey, they all wanted their own place too. So there were still a lot of problems, to say the least. The building of churches and synagogues throughout all this land had been outlawed. Church bells were forbidden. Non-Muslims, called dhimmis, did not have equal rights for the vast majority of that time, and they all had to pay an additional jizya tax, which is a tax that non-Muslims pay when Islam rules their land. Most catastrophically of all, in 1915, the call had gone out to get rid of every Christian in the empire. The Armenian genocide included not only Armenians, but Catholics and Greeks. 1.5 million were murdered, and many more suffered horrifically before making their escape. You can look up and see the Armenian genocide. It's something that Turkey still denies, but it did happen. And for Israel, getting awarded the land of Palestine was not quite the same as getting it. There were still many Ottomans and other Arabs claiming their stake to the land. After all, they had lived there once, so now Muhammad said it was theirs. This is where General Edmund Allenby came in. And he fought for Palestine. Lawrence of Arabia fought for the Arabs. And my, what a time they had blowing up trains and Oh, all kinds of stuff. Such a life they had. Britain awarded, in the end, San Remo, it started. Britain awarded the Arabs 22 states throughout the countryside. If you look there at the north of Africa and on into Turkey, on up into there. So they got 22 states, and little Sheik Faisal, he was just beside himself with happiness. He was so thrilled to get those 22 states. However, Israel was awarded Palestine only on the condition that they didn't throw the Arabs out and that those Arabs could farm and be left to their own there in their land as long as Israel was in charge. Of course, that didn't work out. The Arabs said they would only agree to the deal if the Jews would be under submission to Islam. Resentment grew. They said the land should still belong to Islam according to their beliefs. Battles and skirmishes continued. During the early 1940s, World War II began. This war involved more than 30 countries and was primarily started by the 1939 invasion of Poland by Germany, Nazi Germany. Let's see, we got the San Remo split. All right, so this was the British mandate for Palestine. This was the area that was allotted for Jews to rebuild their national homeland, only they were not allowed to push any Arabs out of their land that still remained there. So then we go to World War II beginning. Many Jews are still living in other places in the world, particularly in Europe. Britain and France at war with Germany. Same thing going on here. The whole world eventually gets involved. The war involved more than 30 countries and started because of the 1939 invasion of Poland by Germany. Seems a few things had not been resolved still from World War I. Nazi Germany had become a fascist state. Merriam-Webster describes fascist as being a populist political philosophy, movement, or regime that exalts nation and often race above the individual. That is severe. No, that is associated with a centralized autocratic government headed by a dictatorial leader, and that is characterized by severe economic and social regimentation and by forcible suppression of any opposition. That's a big definition. However, every other definition that I looked at online listed an insert as the fascist being of the right wing. Merriam-Webster completely leaves that out. So I have my doubts on where that insertion came from. I don't believe that the fascists are all right wing by any measure of the word. Anyway, This was one of the worst wars known to men, primarily due to the abuses of human beings. 6 million Jews killed, 11 million other people killed. Many try to obfuscate that these numbers, especially the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas, who wrote his college thesis on the Holocaust being a farce. He likes to dispute that any Jews were killed during the Holocaust. However, being elected as president for a 4-year term, he has now been in charge for almost 2 full decades, 19 years, I think. Besides, the Germans kept very good notes. The numbers are pretty verifiable. Fullfact.org states Red Cross documents do not support the false claim that far fewer than 6 million Jews were murdered during the Holocaust. Additionally, other wars and programs were instituted by other young countries like Iraq with their Farhud program. Even in America, Jews had become considered to be quite a menace. Innocent Jews were barred from entry to many places. Lynchings were even taking place against innocent Jews. Jews began to do their best to flock to Israel however they could get there. It was their last hope. In 1947, the UN called for a further Palestinian partition of the land between Jews and Arabs. So the UN, they will tell you, um, let's see, we'll put in a query. Can the UN designate state territory? Look what comes up. Does not possess any authority to recognize either a state or a government. So what's the UN trying to pull here? The UN, let me find my place here in my notes. The UN called for a further Palestinian partition of the land between Jews and Arabs. That partition of the land pretty much followed the river all the way down. 78% of the land went to the Arabs. This is the first two-state solution. Israel got this little sliver left over here. This became Syria Trans-Jordan, now just known as Jordan. So they had 22 states, then they got another for the Arabs. Israel still has little Palestine over here. They designated three portions of the land to go to Israel, 4 portions of the land to go to Arabs, and then they hung on to Jerusalem to be internationally administered. Well, as I've already shown you, they had no right to do any of this. But Israel did not fight them so much on it. One of the parts that they took, this is Israel is not the occupier. Israel is the original landowner. But this shows you Judea and Samaria that the UN also gave to the Arabs. Still, Israel put up with it. Israel did not fight it. Israel let the UN, who had no authority to do so, do this to them. Now, in my Bible, it lists Judea as being of the tribe of Judah, and Samaria was down here, was of the tribe of Benjamin, and there's even a large portion of this land of Judah below Jerusalem as having been set aside as the prince's land. I don't know who these people think they are. They are obfuscating God's land. So, once in 1948, Israel fought the war between the Arabs and Israel conquered Jerusalem. They went in. This was in 1948. They won the Temple Mount. Finally, they got to be at the Temple Mount. Those are all the Israeli troops. Immediately, once the keys to the Temple Mount was handed over, the general in charge at the time gave the keys to King of Jordan because he did not want the Arabs and the Israelis to continue to fight over the Temple Mount. Jerusalem is not even mentioned in the Koran. Supposedly, there's a story in there of the horse that flew Muhammad to Jerusalem one night, and so that makes it their holy city. But even the Saudis say, nah, they're just over it to, they fight over it to push the Israelis out. That's all there is to it. It's Israel's land. So once they won the Temple Mount, immediately all of the Arab countries surrounding them started shoving out the Jews that lived in them. 800,000 to 1 million Jews were shoved out of their homes, businesses, bank accounts, investments, whatever, with only the clothes on their back. They were lucky if they got out alive. They traveled through the desert, the elderly, the babies. I don't even know how they did it, but approximately 800,000 to 1 million Jews descended upon Israel. A 22-year-old Bobby Kennedy traveled to Israel in 1948 too. Now, this was still before my days, but he was there to write a periodical for the Boston Post, which was the newspaper of that time, and he was writing about what was going on in Israel. One of the things he talked about was the tremendous influx of Arabs coming into Israel. He said they just flooded the place. In his column, he states that the Muslims just poured into Israel, all of them insisting that Israel was theirs, but also hoping to find medical help from Jewish doctors and real paychecks from Jewish businesses. He too states that Muslims had no problem allowing Jews to stay. The Jews just had to agree to being under Islamic submission. He also described the Jews as being of unparalleled courage. 20 years later, a Palestinian Arab took him out for having stood with Israel. His son is now running on the side with Donald J. Trump, and he has a video out entitled Finish It. I am old enough to remember the day when Bobby Kennedy was killed. And, that time was so crazy. His brother, uh, John Kennedy, had been killed, and you see the children marching in the funeral. And then when Robert Kennedy is killed, and um, you know how the children put up with this. It's a very hard thing to even think back on. However, that's what happened. Robert Kennedy knew who the good guys were and who belonged in the land, and he wrote several articles explaining the same. So the reason all of this is important is that you know, the battles are continuing. Uh, People are wondering what's going to happen. Um, Israelis went to work lugging buckets full of dirt up and down the mountains to plant in. They were drying up the marshes and swamps, veritably turning the wastelands into a vegetation-rich paradise. Trees of all sorts were planted at every opportunity. Water was desalinated, and science had once again become one of the Jews' greatest attributes. In 1967, Israel really gained control of Jerusalem. However, the battles continued. Many various agreements were offered to make peace with Islam, including the famous Arab three no's: no peace, no recognition, no negotiations. Now, within the 35 years or so of first keeping census in Israel, the Arab population jumped from around 300,000 to more than 1.5 million. This was how many Arabs were flocking into Israel. More Arabs than had ever lived there before. Jews, too, since Roman times, they had nowhere else to go. Bobby Kennedy told us what happened with this census. So, the census thing is kind of a big deal because many people say millions and millions of Arabs were displaced. No, even today in Gaza and Judea and Samaria, total, their population is still less than 2 million. It started out much smaller, but it has grown and grown and grown till it is now 2 million or approximately 2 million. Yeah, I don't know since uh, the war, but that's what it was. Famous wars fought in which the Most High showed many miracles and divine protection over Israel. Examining those may be the subject of another video. Um, just last week, we were watching Israel being fired upon from Lebanon, and they rolled out this new rocket launcher. And the rocket launcher fires a round of rockets at Israel, and then poof, it just burst into flames. So, yeah, God fights. He fights for Israel. So the next division for peace was the giving back of the Sinai to Egypt. Um, Egypt, well, that didn't type the whole thing. Here it is. Egypt had kind of been joining with the Arabs to fight against this little Israel, this little orange place here. All of this was given up to the Nile as a part of the land covenant, if you remember from the last video. But Israel agreed to sever this part of the Sinai and give it to Egypt if only they will quit fighting them. That's how badly Israel wanted to stop all the fighting. That was in 1982. So they had Tran-Jordan over here where they gave up 78% of their land, along with Judea and Samaria, that black spot there. Then the Sinai. And then in 2005, the Jews all pulled up and left this area of Gaza. They left behind greenhouses, homes, businesses, and all kinds of infrastructure like plumbing and sewers and water lines and connections for utilities like phones. And um, even though Gaza has major beachfront property, that many people, many realtors would love to get their hands on and develop into something. Um, and they did at one point contain luxury hotels, malls, rooftop restaurants, and much more. You could book your luxury vacation stay in Gaza at one point and have a wonderful time. However, um, very, very little has been allowed to be done for the peons of Gaza, the minions, the rest of the people that live in poverty. Hamas controls any inflow of money and goods. And even still, Israel provides their utilities. Israel provides their food shipments and their goods shipments, all kinds of things. Now, if you had a pit of something living in your backyard that wanted to kill you, and you were still providing its every need for it, how would that make you feel? Every outside shipment to that Gaza will receive would always contain weaponry and explosives to be used against Israel. Israel had no choice but to either blow Gaza off the map finally or to um, partition it off so that they couldn't come to Israel and do all their damage. So they still had this opening here at Egypt, but this part in Israel, this is what they broke down this last October 7th to get into Israel and kill all those people. Okay, so 22% of Israel is Arab population. Christians live there in Israel too. In fact, 99.6% of Middle East lands is Arab. There is only a 0.04, it's 99.96, yeah, 0.04 of the Middle East land is still Israel's. I had a mailbox that was longer to get to once than what it takes to cross Israel at its 9-mile waistline. Now there are 48 countries, 47 of which belong to the UN, that are Arab-based countries. There's only one tiny portion of Israel. In the past, Israel would retaliate for attacks with a few bombed buildings, doing little damage just to keep away world pressure. Would it matter? The media always tries to propagate international sympathy for terrorists while completely ignoring the plight of the Jews. The terrorists, in fact, just rake in millions and millions of dollars contributed to them in sympathy for their kidnapping and slaughter of innocent, docile Jews. I remember the Lebanon War, in which you could sit and watch this. He was called Mr. Green Helmet. This guy drive around in his ambulance with dead kids in the back. He would stop at every location that was picturesque and pose those dead kids there to take pictures of, making it look like Israel was killing kids right and left. It was the same kids, same blankies, same pacifiers. It was just terrible. And even Reuters photographers have been fired for fudging photos of supposed damage by Israel that just was not true. On October 7th, things seemed to reach their height. I have always believed, and I still believe, that Israel is the world's most humane and moral army. Not that that's a requirement. It certainly wasn't a requirement for the U.S., and I'm an American. It's never been our requirement. It's never been Europe's requirement or Japan's requirement. Never been anyone's, but we all require it of Israel. Israel, before retaliating anywhere, phone calls are made to civilians to leave the area. Leaflets are dropped by planes warning civilians to flee. Announcements are made on radio and television. And prior to the actual attack, roof knocking is done where they set off a little explosion on top of the roof. It doesn't do any damage, but it lets you know it's time to get out of Dodge because Israel's going to attack. Um, the problem is when the civilians leave the building, Hamas is waiting outside for them. And they shoot their own people as they leave, moms and babies, whomever. They rob them of anything valuable. I have films of this that are not allowed on YouTube, but just imagine the videos of target practice with watermelons, and that pretty much explains what's been going on. This is why Israel had to go in for a few weeks to guard those civilians trying to leave. Excuse me. Now, on the day, October 7th, that the barbarous slaughter took place on Israel, Israel had been living in peace with the Arabs. The people that were attacked were people that had been taking the Arabs to doctors and hospitals in Israel. They had been trying to help the Arabs had learned and mapped out their neighborhoods. They learned even their dog's name and who was home on Saturdays and the whole 9 yards. They knew everything. The civilian people in Gaza that Israel was protecting and trying to help, these were the same ones that ran in behind Hamas, were looting the homes, doing the same barbarities to the people still alive there, um, kicking them around, cleaning out their refrigerators and sitting and watching TV as they laid there bleeding to death. But Israel still went in to protect them so they could get away from Hamas. In this map here, Iran is the body of the spider. I wonder if I can annotate. Yeah, Iran is the body of the spider. It should be black though. Iran has its leg down here in Oman, in Yemen. Here in Saudi, not so much, but to some extent. Here in Iraq, here in Jordan, here in Syria, here in Lebanon, here in Turkey. They've been trying to do what they can in Armenia and Turkmenistan, all of these guys, Uzbekistan. Iran is the main leader here in everything that goes on. So when Israel, tiny Israel, tries to fight back, every leg of the spider begins to kick back at her. The terrorists that fight with Israel, they get so much money. And so in essence, they might lose the battle, but they get so many billions of dollars, like from Qatar and other places that feel sorry for them. They make out like bandits. The leaders go and live in luxury while the people of their country are left to poverty. To all of the excuses of the Christians in Palestine that say, oh, Israel's mean to us. The convincing Hollywood productions, and they are many, it is true. Those with replacement theories in their heads, saying that Christians have replaced Israel. I urge you to read your Bible. The supposed conditions of God's promises. If God is not true to his promises for Jews, we Christians don't stand a chance. I can only say I have watched these goings on now for at least 20 years. Granted, I'm no great scholar or anything, but it doesn't take a genius to see who's the good guy and who's the bad guy. One thing that is not even mentioned is the atrocious amount of Christians in Africa that are also being slaughtered by the Muslims. Everywhere Islam goes, no one has a full life anymore. It's just the truth of the matter. Ezekiel 36 through 39 states that the Lord will bring the Jews back to their promised land. He's been doing that. And the last 5 chapters of Zecharia are so very exciting. They deal with this, that the Lord will appear with his army the spiritual IDF, that's us, and he will annihilate the enemies of Israel. Um, the age of grace will then be at an end, and the Jews will suddenly have their veils lifted or their eyes opened, as it speaks of in Romans 11. He will turn his face to Israel once again and pour out his Holy Spirit and grace upon them. I know there's experts that want to say, yeah, but this is this and that is that and all of that. Sorry, the fact remains God will fulfill his promises. I know Revelations 2 and Revelations 3 says this and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. The Lord is coming through for his people, and we do not replace them. We join them, but we do not replace them. It's a dark and growing darker world that we live in. We can only survive walking with the Lord, having truth on our side. Do not let yourselves be found fighting against the truth and the God of Israel. Do not be found wanting in this way. Make peace with God today. Trust that he knows what he's doing. And then let's walk out what's left of this world with him as our guide. I just also want to mention that yesterday I happened to see a video by Canary Mission. If you need any proof that uh, Islam has plans for America, you need to get on their website, their X site on Twitter X, and watch the movie that they have put up. It's 7 or 8 minutes, but it will certainly tell you what's going on in America. And it's death to America, just like it's death to Israel. They are not more powerful than God. He is who I will place my trust in. All the best to you. Thank you so much for joining me and listening to me today. I hope you will list any questions or comments you have on this video. God bless you in Jesus' name.